What is up, everybody? Today I'm back here with another video, and I want to talk about something I've been doing some preliminary research into, and that is going to be Gregory of Palamas and this essence energy distinction that keeps coming up in circles both on YouTube and in the intellectual sphere and in the popular sphere. So, if you have paid attention to what's going on in kind of these Orthodox Catholic debates and such, you will have noticed that Jay Dyer, Gavin Ortland, Swan Sona, Michael Lofton, Eric Ybarra, all these guys are talking about this essence energies distinction, and continuously is brought up in all these YouTube, podcast, academic, and layperson spheres. So if you talk to an Orthodox Christian at all, they will probably bring this up. And in fact, in Aristotle East and West, David Bradshaw claims that the essence energies distinction is the fundamental thing that divides East and West. So what is it? Let me give you what I have found so far. And I will preface this by saying this is not a systematic 100% complete account of what it is. This has been one of the most difficult philosophic topics that I've encountered. And I'll get to why that is in a minute. But let me start out by giving a little bit of an overview, then I'll talk about the history, then I'll talk about 2 readings of Palamas you can give. So, the essence energies distinction is basically a theological or philosophic distinction in God, between God's essence and his energies. God's essence is totally unknowable to us, and it is uncreated, whereas the energies are also uncreated, but they are fully knowable to us, and they are his, another translation is, they are God's activities in the world. So, how to go about cashing this out? Well, for starters, Palamas himself tries to use an analogy to explain this. So he uses the analogy of the sun. So you have the sun, when you look at it, it will blind you if you look at it, so you can't know it. You can't know the core of the sun. You can't get close to it. It's too hot. But the sun's rays are what sustains life, and they would be the sun's activities on this earth. Yet, the sun's rays are not separable from the sun, and they are not distinct from the sun. So they're not an ontological distinct unit or subject from the sun. In the same way, Palamas tries to argue, the God's energies are in fact not distinct from him, but they are the way that God participates in this reality and sustains life, and how we participate in divinization. So that's the basic idea. And it raises more questions than it answers. Is this an extramental distinction? Does this have any metaphysical justification? Does it violate simplicity? Does it violate aseity? Why is it even needed in the first place? All sorts of stuff. I'm sure you can multiply these. So let me start with a little bit of a historical narrative, because I think it's important to understand philosophic problems in the context of their history. Palamas posits this as an explanation for the religious experiences of the monks on Mount Athos. So Palamas is at Mount Athos, and there's a group of monks who experience the Tabor light, or the uncreated, purportedly experience the Tabor light or the uncreated light. And this group of monks is known as the Hesychasts. This is called the Hesychast controversy. So you have this group of monks who are praying the Jesus prayer, and they experience or see this vision of God. They have this mystical experience of God, and they claim that it's the uncreated light of God, like the disciples saw on Mount Tabor. And this attracts a lot of attention from critics. So some critics claim that they're heretical, some claim that they're just incoherent, and Gregory Palamas rises to their defense, and he writes this book called The Triads. And this, happening at this time, it's just steeped in controversy about tradition, philosophic controversy, exegetical controversy, political controversy. So this is just a very, very controversial, not only doctrine, but the historical time and where this is happening, the context in which it's happening is extremely, extremely controversial. So if you want more on that, you can check out the scholarship of Dominican friar Peter Totelman, in his dissertation on this. It's about the first 50 pages or so. So Gregory writes this work, and he posits the distinction between essence and energies. And he says, okay, the monks, they're praying, they're seeing the energies of God. And these energies are uncreated. They're also fully God, but they're not seeing the essence. And Gregory is canonized as a saint in the East in like 1368 or something, and his critics are condemned. So that settles the matter, right? Well, no. Because there were a lot of problems with Gregory's view at the time. So one of his followers wanted Gregory to go back and revise his work, and Gregory never did that. Again, this is in Father Peter Totelben's dissertation. You can go check this out. And so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of metaphysical justification for this. Again, recall what I said. Gregory posited this as an explanation for the monks' experiences on Mount Athos. He didn't logically deduce this like Augustine or Aquinas do. So his model of God is not, shall we say, as rigorous as Augustine's or Aquinas's. And this is interesting because what this leads to is it leads to a reading of Palamas that one can give. Now, Metropolitan Callistos Ware, in his, I think it's his paper on, paper book, I can't remember, I was just looking at it online, on Palamas, seems to give this non-metaphysical reading, where Palamas is seen as a spiritual teacher. He's a monk, he's a spiritual teacher, he's not a speculative metaphysician. And so this coincides with Gregory's own wording in some places. So, for instance, on page 87 of the Triads, Gregory claims that we shouldn't try to understand how this essence-energies distinction works. We should just recognize that it has a scriptural basis, it has some basis in the Church Fathers, and it has a basis in the religious experiences of the monks. So therefore, we should just affirm it and move on. This is problematic. So it's problematic to me because it something without sufficient justification, and I don't take the religious experiences of the monks to be sufficient justification for a seriously controversial metaphysical claim. So if you don't have sufficient justification, you probably shouldn't believe it. So it seems like something that's so important and such an essential position in orthodoxy, or at least in many orthodox circles, it seems like it should have some pretty hefty metaphysics backing it up. And there are 4 other problems that you can raise. If you want me to type those out, I can raise them in the comment section. I don't want to go into them because I don't want this video to be an hour long. But it seems like if you take this non-metaphysical reading of Palamas and just affirm that, oh, well, it was the monk's experience and therefore we should posit it, and there's some, hinting at it in the Church Fathers and in the scriptures, well, it seems like that could undermine natural theology, which I know that a lot of Orthodox are not a fan of anyway. It seems like it could end you up in some hypocrisy. So, for instance, it seems like if you took this route and said that, oh, it's just a mystery, this essence-energies distinction, it's just a mystery, you can't have any metaphysics behind it. Well, it seems like the Augustinian or the Thomist could do the exact same thing. And then if you claimed that the essence-energy distinction, as many Orthodox do, is superior to the Thomistic or Augustinian notion, well, then you'd be caught in a stalemate and you would be engaged in some hypocritical reasoning. So those problems abound on this non-metaphysical reading. And it also seems boring. It seems boring and kind of makes Gregory out to be a little bit of a dunce. If you take this non-metaphysical reading, it makes him sound like he's just willing to go along with whatever spiritual experiences that he finds in his friends, and that he's just kind of willing to read that into scriptures and texts, and he's not really engaged in delving deep into what this means. And that seems to make him into a pretty poor thinker, if he's not willing to spell out what his claims are. So I don't think that's the case. I really don't think that that is the case. If you take a look at the triads, you'll clearly see that he is quoting Pseudo-Dionysius, he's quoting Maximus, he's quoting the fathers. It seems like he's a rigorous thinker. It seems like he knows what he's doing. And so I think that alone can give you some pause, and you should reflect on that and say, okay, well, there's something more that might be going on here. And so it seems like we could theoretically try to steelman Gregory Palamas and try to make his account of the essence and energies distinction much more rigorous than just an explanation for what the monks at Mount Athos were seeing. And this is what a guy named Eric Pearl does. So Pearl, in 1991, really steelmans Gregory of Palamas. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people are talking about this. So I've looked through Father Peter Totelbin's work. I've glanced around at some other secondary literature on Palamas. I have looked at some interviews on the main podcast and YouTube channels in this area. And it doesn't seem like anyone is really grappling with Palamas' Neoplatonic heritage. And so in this 1991 article by Pearl makes the claim that Palamas is inheriting a tradition from Proclus, Pseudo-Dionysius, and Maximus the Confessor. And because of this, he should be read in light of their metaphysics. So that's what I think should be done. And I think that in order to make the strongest Palamite claims, or steelman the Palamite claims, make them into the strongest they could be, you should try to formulate them within his historical and philosophic context. So let me give you an overview of how Pearl does this, because I think this makes him into a much more interesting and nuanced thinker. It's a separate question whether or not Palamas himself would agree with Pearl's characterization. That's an exegetical question. And I think that Pearl, as a Neo-Palamite, is really concerned with where Palamas' thought tends. But in any case, I think that to really compete with the Thomist and the Augustinian and people in the secular world critiquing divine models of God, such as neo-theists, open theists, secular people, as mentioned, whatever. I think in order to compete with them, you have to have a more robust account than just simply saying, okay, well, this was posited as an explanation for the monks, and we're going to move on. I think you really need a coherent metaphysics underpinning the essence energies distinction if you want to defend it today. So, what does Pearl do? Well, this is going to sound shocking, but I think it's quite interesting. Pearl is going to claim that Palamas is inheriting a Neoplatonic metaphysics, and in fact, he is the culmination, and he's going to provide the solution to one of the fundamental problems in Neoplatonism. And so Palamas is really the final stepping stone, the pinnacle of the Neoplatonic heritage. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that Palamas, following Proclus, Dionysius, and Maximus, and of course Plato and Plotinus before them, inherits a problem. Philosophy is done through problems, so he inherits a problem. And then he posits this essence energies distinction as a solution to that problem. Again, whether or not this is exegetically correct is different. People will probably dispute this, but this is Pearl's reading, and I think it's, again, interesting and well worth taking seriously. But Palamas inherits a problem, and let me try to explain this problem. It's going to be very difficult to explain, but this is philosophy, so let me try to explain it for you. Going all the way back to Plato, there's a problem in the Parmenides, the dialogue of the Parmenides. And the problem is this. You have the Platonic forms. And the forms are causes of things. They make things to be what they are. Okay? Whether or not that's just formal causation or it's also efficient causation, we'll leave that aside for now. Forms are causes. But in causing things to be what they are, according to a Neoplatonic principle, the cause must always be in that thing. So to give you an example, there's a bunch of trees outside. The trees are caused to be by the form. But the form, according to this Neoplatonic principle of procession, reversion, and remaining, according to this Neoplatonic principle, the form, the cause, must be in the thing. So the form of tree, causing the trees to be what they are, must be in the trees. But then it's not a form. Then it's particular. Because the form was originally posited in the Platonic system to solve the problem of the one and the many. The form is supposed to explain how many things can be said to be one, i.e. how many trees can be said to be trees. In the Parmenides, again, the forms are claimed to be the precondition for the possibility of discourse. In order to talk about cars, trees, desks, chairs, tables, we have to posit some one form over the many, uniting the many. So the form is supposed to be one, but it's also in each of these things. So therefore it's many. And this is why Plotinus in the third Aeneid calls forms one many's, because they are one, but they are also divided. This is a problem, okay? Because you have a contradiction here. And it's a bigger problem when you're talking about the one. So for those who are not familiar, in Neoplatonism, you have a quest for explanation, ultimate explanation. And you're looking for an auto-explicable first principle, something in which all explanation terminates. And this is called the one. The one, or the good, is the ultimate first principle that explains everything else and itself is not explained. It's in principle, that's where the buck stops. It's in principle the stopping point of explanation because it has explanation in itself. But we have a problem here because the one has to be simple. It can't be composed of any parts. And the reason why is because then that would necessitate some sort of reason for why it's composed. And therefore it wouldn't explain everything. It would still leave something unexplained. And so then it wouldn't be the first principle. So you have to have a first principle that's simple, okay? But the first principle as cause of all also has to be in everything according to the Neoplatonic principle of procession, reversion, and remaining. So the one being simple and being the first explanation or the ultimate explanation explains why everything is generated. Yet in generating, it is in everything. So therefore it's no longer simple, it's divided. So the question becomes how exactly you can have a one that generates a many. And this is something that Plotinus, in fact, leaves unanswered. And if you want, you can go and take a look at it. I have the citations here. Aeneid 3.8, Aeneid 3.10, 3.9, Aeneid 6.4, Aeneid 5.2, Aeneid 5.3. Gerson talks about this a little bit more in this text. So, again, you have a problem here. How can a one generate a many? How can a many participate in a one? And this seems to create a massive problem for the Platonists, and it threatens to undermine the coherency of their entire project. Because if you have a first principle that's not participated in, then it has no explanatory role in your system. And if you have a first principle that is participated in, then it doesn't seem to be your first principle. This is why Proclus posits the henads. So Proclus says the one is not participated in, but the henads are. Again, this doesn't seem to make much sense, but I could be getting this totally wrong. Plotinus doesn't seem to solve this issue at all. Damascius tries to take this a different way, and I think he claims that the one is just not coherent. So what are you to do? Well, according to Pearl, Palamas posits the essence-energies distinction as a solution to this fundamental problem in Platonism. This is a very interesting claim. Not if it's true, then it would make Palamas the ultimate, basically, king or pinnacle of Platonism, which is quite ironic, because it would show the case, the triumph of the Christian interpretation of Platonism. Now, on the other hand, this also doesn't seem to be coherent. So Pearl ends the article by saying that Palamas's essence-energies distinction is as a solution to this Neoplatonic problem, it's a necessary ontological contradiction or paradox. And the way Pearl puts it is that in positing this as a solution to the Neoplatonic problem, you have participated and unparticipated in a single unified first principle, which would be God for Palamas. So God's essence is unparticipated, and God's energies are participated. And because of that, they can account for how the one generates the many. It generates the many through energies, whereas the essence is still causally unparticipated. And so you preserve the unparticipated essence while also having the participated energies. And you get your first principle, that is the stopping point in explanation, while also providing a solution as to how the one generates the many. But that doesn't seem to solve the problem, because now you have some sort of composition in the one, namely a participated and unparticipated, and that's a logical contradiction. And Pearl points out a couple more of these contradictions, and that's why he says that the Palamite solution is a necessary ontological paradox, or contradiction, as he states it. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Because it would seem if you have a contradiction in a thing, you should just reject it as a reductio ad absurdum, through a reductio ad absurdum. So it seems like if Pearl is right in this interpretation of Palamas, you have a logical contradiction in the concept, or in this metaphysical reading, which would make the entire essence energies distinction under this interpretation incoherent and totally rejected. So one potential solution is to try to deny that the principle of non-contradiction applies to God. I don't know if the consequences for that would be tenable, because that would seem to collapse you into a divine command theory, perhaps, maybe pulling out the Euthyphro dilemma. I don't know where that could lead. So at least at this point, it seems that in my reading of Palamas, I'm stuck in kind of a catch-22. It seems like if you read Palamas as just providing a non-metaphysical account of the religious experiences of the monks in Mount Athos, you get into a kind of loosey-goosey, non-rigorous, just experiential theological take that can't compete with the robustness of
Do you want me to keep reading?
secular critiques.
Okay, I found this on the web for secular critiques. Check
And
it
now
out.
my Siri is going off. Hold on 1 sec. I don't know why it's doing that. All right. So, as you can tell, that's a problem. if you take that non-metaphysical route, again, you threaten you seem to open the doors to some threats from secularism and hypocrisy, as I laid out, and also just, it seems to me, lazy thinking. Um, on the other hand, if you take this more metaphysical route and you read Palamas through Proclus, Dionysius, and Maximus, you open the door to pure incoherence, as Pearl quite literally points out. So, I don't know. It's tempting to look at this, and again, I'm going to do some deeper dives, and maybe I'll just delete this video at some point and make a new one when I learn more. But it seems like at this point that Palamas is, in fact, his account of God is not the way to go. Whether or not the Augustinian route is more coherent is a different question, but it seems like the Palamite position is not tenable thus far. So I hope you liked the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what I did well, what I didn't, and yeah, please engage and enjoy.